Welcome, midnight wanderers, to another chilling tale beneath the veil of darkness. Tonight, we delve into the realm of Navajo legend, where shadows dance with whispered secrets and fear lurks in the silence. Brace yourselves as we unravel the enigma of the skinwalkers, creatures of the night whose haunting presence sends shivers down the spine. Prepare to journey into the unknown. It was a cold, moonless night when I decided to take a drive through the winding roads of the Navajo reservation. I often visited this place, drawn by its stark beauty and the quiet that seemed to envelop everything in a serene, almost eerie calm. As I drove, the darkness outside my car windows seemed to press in on me, the only illumination coming from my headlights cutting through the inky blackness. I had heard stories, of course, tales of skinwalkers, shapeshifters, who could assume the form of animals or even other humans. These stories were part of the local lore, whispered about around campfires and told to children as warnings, but I never took them seriously, until that night. It was around midnight when I noticed something odd. I was driving along a particularly deserted stretch of road. The landscape around me was flat and desolate, dotted with only a few scraggly bushes and rocks. Suddenly, I saw a figure standing by the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a coyote, but as I drew closer, I realized it was a man. He was tall and gaunt, with long, stringy hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in weeks. Something about him felt off, a chill running down my spine as I slowed the car. Against my better judgment, I rolled down the window slightly, just enough to call out to him. "Hey, do you need help?" I asked, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the stillness of the night. The man didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, staring at me with eyes that seemed too dark, too empty. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and raspy, almost as if he hadn't used it in a long time. "Just a ride," he said. I hesitated, everything inside me screaming to just drive away, but I found myself unlocking the door. He climbed in, the air inside the car growing noticeably colder. I couldn't help but glance at him as I pulled back onto the road. His eyes seemed to be fixed on the horizon, but there was something in his gaze that unsettled me. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, but couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. I kept glancing at him out of the corner of my eye, trying to shake the feeling of the unease that clung to me. Suddenly, he turned to me, his eyes catching mine in the rearview mirror. "Do you know about the skinwalkers?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A shiver ran down my spine. "I've heard stories," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're real," he said, his gaze never leaving mine. "And they're always watching." Before I could respond, he opened the door and jumped out, rolling into the darkness. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, and leaped out of the car. But he was gone. There was no trace of him anywhere, as if he had vanished into thin air. I got back into the car, locking the doors and speeding away as fast as I could. When I finally reached the nearest town, I told the locals what had happened. They listened, their faces growing grim. "You saw a skinwalker," one of the elders said. "They can take many forms, and they're always looking for something or someone." I never drove through that reservation at night again. And every time I think about that encounter, I can still see those dark, empty eyes staring back at me, reminding me of the things that lurk in the shadows just beyond our understanding. Under the dim flicker of a kerosene lamp, Grandpa's aged face looked almost spectral, shadows dancing across his weathered features as he leaned closer. Outside, the wind howled through the desert. The old cabin's wooden walls creaked and moaned under the weight of the unseen force. "Boy," Grandpa's voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible above the storm. "There's things in this land that the city folk don't believe in no more. Things older than the rocks and the dirt. Things that ain't forgotten their power." The boy wrapped tightly in a thick blanket nodded solemnly, his eyes wide and unblinking. He knew when Grandpa talked like this, it wasn't just to scare him. These were the truths of the desert, the lore of their people. "They call it a skinwalker," Grandpa continued, the words seeming to hang heavy in the air. "It's a witch, a creature that can wear the skin of any animal it kills, whispering into the night in voices stolen from those it silenced. But it's got a hunger, boy, a terrible, insatiable hunger." Grandpa paused, the light flickering as if hesitating to reveal more. He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the window where the night pressed dark against the glass. "One winter, much like tonight, a skinwalker came prowling. It had the guise of a coyote, eyes like coal embers and a grin full of malice. Your grandma and we heard it scratching at the door, mimicking the cry of a lost child, trying to lure us into its trap." The boy's grip tightened around his blanket, his imagination painting every gruesome detail of the beast lurking just beyond their doorstep. "It wanted chaos. It wanted fear." Grandpa's voice dropped to a near whisper. "But we knew the signs. We knew the prayers. That night, we painted the symbols above the doors, burned sage, and spoke the ancient words given to us by our ancestors." The storm outside crescendoed as if angry by the recounting of the tale, the wind slamming against the cabin with renewed fury. Did it go away?" the boy asked, his voice quivering. "For a time, it did. But remember this, boy." Grandpa's eyes were stern, imparting a lesson of utmost importance. "A skinwalker is never truly gone. It waits, bides its time, learning from its failures. And on nights like this, when the wind howls its lonely song, keep your eyes sharp and your heart guarded." That winter, the one when the skinwalker came calling, it marked the beginning of a dark time. Grandpa continued, his voice a low rumble. "Your grandma and we heard things at night scratching at the windows, soft whispers in the wind that sounded almost human. It wore at us, each night a little more, each sound a deeper crack in our resolve." He paused, taking a slow sip of his coffee, the bitter aroma mingling with the scent of burning sage that lingered in the air. The boy noticed his hand tremble just slightly as he set the mug down. "One night, when the moon was just a sliver in the sky, I saw it. The skinwalker, not hiding its true form this time, It stood at the edge of the woods, a grotesque figure, its body twisted and raw. It was wearing the skin of a bear, but its eyes, those eyes were human, filled with a hatred that could freeze your soul. The boy swallowed hard, his eyes darting towards the window as if expecting to see the glowing embers of the creature's gaze staring back at him. I did what had to be done. I took your uncle's rifle, loaded it with blessed bullets by the shaman, and walked into the night. The air was so cold it burned my lungs. The silence so complete I could hear the beating of my own heart. Grandpa's voice was steady, but the boy sensed the fear that must have gripped him on that fateful night. The skinwalker knew I was there. It could smell my intent. We circled each other in the moonlight, a dance of death between man and monster. It tried to speak, its voice a horrifying mix of human and animal, but I didn't listen. I couldn't. With a deep breath, Grandpa leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper now. I fired the rifle. The shot echoed like thunder rolling across the hills. The creature screamed, a sound so terrible it seemed to split the very night itself. It fled, wounded, but alive. I'd marked it, boy. Marked it so it could never fully hide again. The boy's heart pounded in his chest. Is it still out there, Grandpa? Could it come back? Grandpa nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the flicker of the lamp. It might. That's why we must never forget the old ways, the protections and the prayers. We must pass them down just as I'm passing them to you. Outside, the storm seemed to recede, the winds finally calming. Grandpa pulled the blanket up around the boy's shoulders. Now sleep, and remember the strength of our ancestors. They watch over us even in the darkest of times. As the boy drifted into uneasy sleep, the last thing he saw was Grandpa, rifle in hand, staring into the night. It was late autumn, and the trees in the forest behind my cabin were almost bare, their skeletal branches reaching up towards the sky like grasping fingers. I decided to spend the weekend at my secluded cabin in the woods to get away from the constant buzz of city life. The first night was peaceful, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. But as the second night fell, a different kind of quiet took over. The kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The locals had warned me about the woods, telling tales of strange happenings and creatures that were best left undisturbed. Among these tales, the most persistent were the stories of the skinwalkers. Shapeshifters, they said, that could take the form of animals or even humans with the sole purpose of causing mischief and harm. I was skeptical, of course. I'd heard plenty of scary stories in my time, but I'd never experienced anything that couldn't be explained. That changed the moment I stepped outside that night. I had built a small fire pit just a few yards from the cabin. The flickering flames cast long shadows, and the cold night air was filled with the scent of burning wood. I sat by the fire, enjoying the warmth, when I heard it. A faint whispering coming from the trees. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. I stood up, my eyes scanning the dark woods. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish but unable to shake the sense of being watched. There was no response, just the whispering, growing ever closer. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow fleeted between the trees, too fast to be human. My heart pounded as I strained to see in the dim light. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. A deer, its eyes reflecting the firelight. But something about it was wrong. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it were a puppet being controlled by unseen strings. The deer stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, and the deer mirrored my movement, stepping forward. I knew I should retreat to the safety of the cabin, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mix of fear and curiosity. The whispers grew louder, and as they did, the deer began to change. Its form shimmered and shifted, becoming something grotesque and twisted. Before my eyes, the deer's legs elongated, its body contorted, and its face morphed into something that was almost human, but not quite. I was staring at a skinwalker. Fear surged through me, and I finally broke free of my paralysis. I turned and ran towards the cabin, the skinwalker's distorted form following me, its movements unnervingly silent. I burst through the cabin door and slammed it shut, locking it behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the door, listening. The whispering was now right outside the cabin, a chorus of voices speaking a language I couldn't understand. The windows rattled, and shadows danced on the walls as if the fire outside had grown wild. I didn't dare look out, afraid of what I might see. After what felt like hours, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I stayed by the door, my heart racing, until the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, the fire was nothing but embers, and the forest was still. I left the cabin that morning, vowing never to return. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. In the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, its eyes following me. They remind me that some stories are more than just tales. They're warnings. As the moon retreats behind the horizon, we bid farewell to the realm of skinwalkers, where every rustle in the night holds a tale untold. Remember to keep your lanterns lit and your wits about you as you traverse the darkened paths of midnight delight. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of fellow midnight explorers. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the whispers of the unknown. Sleep well, but beware of the shadows.